Good. Well, welcome everyone to today's discussion about the implications of the ongoing conflict in Darfur and the atrocities being committed, including ethnically targeted killings, burning of villages, and widespread sexual violence. As we all know, the war in Sudan has not received anywhere near the level of high-level political and diplomatic attention or international media attention that it deserves. And this is even more true of the conflict in Darfur, where there have been prolonged telecommunications blackouts. Today is an opportunity to put the spotlight on Darfur and on the Darfuri communities who have suffered so much for so long, and to express solidarity and, of course, condolences to those who have lost loved ones. Today, we're going to look at the dynamics of the conflict in Darfur, how it evolved since the mid-1980s, and how it fits into the context of the wider war in Sudan and what might happen next. We will look at the humanitarian catastrophe as famine looms across the country, particularly in Darfur, and in some areas is already present, amid continuing restrictions on delivery of humanitarian assistance imposed by both warring parties, and also at the atrocities committed, especially in El Geneina, Ardamata, and elsewhere in West Darfur, and now the extremely perilous situation in Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, which is besieged by the Rapid Support Force, and where there is great alarm about the prospect of an imminent massacre of civilians, as fighting intensifies between the Rapid Support Force and the Sudanese Armed Forces and some of the SAF-aligned movements, as the RSF tries to capture the city. The escalation of the conflict, which is happening as we speak, includes burning of villages by the Rapid Support Force, increasing aerial bombing by the Sudanese Air Force, and blocked aid, which could be catastrophic for the civilian population of 1.5 million, including 800,000 displaced people who've moved to El Fasher from other parts of Darfur seeking refuge. It's worth remembering that the Rapid Support Force was created under the auspices of Bashir's intelligence services and trained and deployed by the Sudanese army to conduct its counterinsurgency campaign in Darfur. Hemeti was promoted to be leader of the Rapid Support Force because he was seen as a particularly effective Janjaweed commander, and Burhan was a military intelligence officer in Darfur. In the absence of any accountability for past crimes, we're seeing the same actors and methods being used today. In addition to describing and analysing the situation, we also hope to look at what diplomatic or other levers could be used to avert further mass atrocities and to reach a ceasefire, nationally or perhaps initially at local level, allowing humanitarian access to the starving population, and whether any mechanisms could be put in place to protect civilians, whether more pressure could be put on the warring parties through the threat of further sanctions or very high-level political intervention with their regional backers to get them to use their leverage on the warring parties to urge restraint. The urgency of action, particularly to avert an imminent catastrophe in El Fasher, could not be clearer. I would add briefly by way of background that the gravity of the situation in Darfur was highlighted by the all-party parliamentary group for Sudan and South Sudan in its report published in April 2023, which drew attention to the sharp spike in ethnically targeted violence in Darfur following the UN Security Council's decision to withdraw UNAMID, the AU-UN peacekeeping mission, in 2020, which had at least provided a degree of deterrence. And just a few weeks after that happened, the international community watched helplessly as thousands of Masalite civilians were killed in El Geneina, the state capital of West Darfur, by the Rapid Support Force and allied militias, or as they tried to escape just 40 kilometers to the Chad border. In January this year, the special prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan, told the Security Council that there are grounds to believe that presently Rome Statute crimes are being committed in Darfur by both the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces and affiliated groups. Last November, the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights issued an urgent call for action to prevent genocide in Darfur, and in mid-April it released the first independent legal analysis into breaches of the Genocide Convention in Darfur, about which we will hear more shortly. Human Rights Watch has also released a report on ethnic cleansing and crimes against humanity committed against the Masalik people in West Darfur. And other organisations have been documenting violations in Darfur and across Sudan, including the Centre for Information Resilience and the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab that is closely tracking developments in Fasher. So there's no shortage of documentation or of early warning. The problem is lack of early response and effective preventive action. So to discuss all these issues, we have a very distinguished panel with us today, including Khulud Khair, the Director of Confluence Advisory, who is a very well-known political analyst and commentator. Yona Diamond, who is the Senior Legal Counsel at the Raoul Wallenberg Centre for Human Rights, specialising in atrocity prevention, accountability, and political prisoner advocacy. And Yona has worked with a wide range of human rights organisations, including Oxfam America, the Innocence Project, Human Rights Watch, and the UN International Tribunal for Rwanda. Our third speaker is Abdallah Idris Abu Ghada, who chairs the Darfur Diaspora Association in the UK and has been leading their efforts to bring the Darfur case to the international community's attention. And finally, we hope to have Toby Harwood, the Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator for Sudan, who is leading the UN's humanitarian operations in Darfur from eastern Chad, where there are over 500,000 newly displaced refugees from Darfur, and refugees are still streaming across the border every day. Toby has recently returned from a visit to Fasher. He's worked for the UN for, I think, 25 years, and he started his career in DPKO, the Department for Peacekeeping Operations, before moving across to the humanitarian side, working with UNHCR. This is a hybrid event, which is being live streamed on Zoom. The event is being held on the record this time, so it's not under the Chatham House rule. And before we start, perhaps I could just ask you to put your phones on silent. Once our four speakers have given their introductory presentations, we will open the floor to questions and comments. Those joining on Zoom will be able to use the raised hand function to signal if they would like to contribute to the discussion. Unfortunately, we can't take questions from those joining us on Facebook, and you are welcome to tweet the event using the hashtag #CHAfrica. So I will now invite our panelists to make their introductory remarks for about 8 minutes, starting with Khulud Khair. We've asked the speakers to observe the time limit fairly strictly so that we can allow plenty of time for questions. So Khulud, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roz. And good afternoon, everyone. This is obviously a difficult subject for most of us to speak about because it's unfolding before our eyes, and those of us from Sudan are, to some great or lesser degree, very much impacted directly by what happens in Darfur. So I just want to, highlight that at the outset, because I know all of us would be, to some degree, feeling this. I've been asked to frame what's happening in Darfur in sort of the broader context of the Sudanese war, and I'd say that this is something that, of course, so many of us in the room are qualified to do. So I'm very much looking forward to questions. But one thing that I would say is that, the first thing that really sort of comes to my mind is this saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And here we are 20 years after the Darfur genocide first time round, and we're very much seeing similar dynamics play out. We're very much seeing the same kind of politics play out. And of course, we know that one of the reasons we are where we are with the conflict in general, and why war broke out on the 15th of April last year, why we had the coup in 2021, is the question of impunity. And it's a question that we never, ever really were able to settle in successive peace and political agreements. And the lack of attention on accountability and impunity has led us to where we are. There is very much an element of the different parties, but in this case, particularly the RSF in Darfur, feeling as if they have a lot of room, effectively, to enact a lot of their atrocities. They've never been held to account in any sort of significant way, and they don't see that there's any move to do that so far. The ICC has not been a deterrent. The ICC works at a very glacial pace, as we know, and so it just hasn't been that robust and immediate response. And that's in many ways driving the political calculus of a lot of different actors in Sudan, both at the senior level, but also on the ground. One thing I would say is that beyond just impunity, there are typologies of violence that are taking place in Sudan that are not linear and that they are not singular. And what we're seeing in Sudan is the confluence of these different typologies. So we're seeing the kind of conflict dynamics that we see between, for example, SAF and the RSF, but there are so many conflict interfaces in Darfur, and we see that most acutely in Fasher, where you have, of course, SAF and the RSF, but you have Juba Peace Agreement signatories, you have Juba Peace Agreement non-signatories, you have ethnic militias on either side, you have the shifting of loyalties from one day to the next, you have the sort of proliferation of arms that is drawing in a sort of centrifugal way a lot of different political actors. And this brings about, I think, a different typology that is often seen as too complex to engage with. But one thing that I've always wanted to stress is that actually, because you have so many different actors with so many fluid interests, sometimes that can provide pathways towards mediation that would otherwise not be there if we had static set positions between sort of one or two actors. And that's important. Maybe we can talk about this later because we don't have much time now, but in terms of trying to figure out how we avert atrocities in Darfur and how we cause at least a bit of a pause to some of the tensions that we're seeing, are rooted in exactly these opportunities at the local level. And it's worth saying that the myriad different negotiation platforms that we've had, from Jeddah to Manama to Cairo, whether they're back channel talks or very much public, have never really contended with the local realities and the local ceasefire negotiations that have happened on the ground. One thing to note is that you have different political logics and different conflict logics playing out. So some of the attacks that we have seen in different parts of Darfur don't necessarily look like the rest of the country. You have, in particular, and this is, I don't think is unique to Sudan, but you have this phenomenon where peace agreements drive conflict in a very specific and immediate way. And so you have groups who have been rewarded through peace agreements now trying to seek some kind of score settling under the broader umbrella of the conflict at the national level. And again, the fact that none of these are contended with means that we are not able to grapple with what is driving conflict on the ground. And that is part of the reason why Darfur has seen sort of the lion's share of the fighting in and across Sudan. I just want to briefly touch on what a win in Fasher would mean for both sides. Right now, Fasher is sort of the last stand, if you want to put it that way. It is the last Darfuri capital that is not under RSF control. There are very grim predictions about what would happen if a full-out battle, an all-out battle was to take place. To my mind, there's a drip-drab approach to this attack for a reason, and that reason is that you can let's say the RSF can pretend at, engaging with negotiations, can pretend at engaging with different mediators to try and find a resolution, but really they're making not very incremental gains on a daily basis. This morning we heard that they took over the power stations, and so they're making gains as we go. So a win for the RSF is not just about Fasher, it's about securing supply lines from Libya, particularly related to fuel. It's about being able to shore up that western border and to be able to bring in weapons as well as recruits from across the Sahel. And for SAF, it would be a way for them to try to get to Jenin and figure out, to some degree, a way to stop the cross-border arms that have been coming in. Now, what that means is that Al-Fasher will be a high-stakes showdown between the RSF and SAF. All indicators, some security experts who've been watching this very, very closely, intimate that Al-Fasher will fall into the hands of the RSF reasonably soon. But the question is, what does that mean for the civilian population? This is not about, a military win either way. We know this war will not be settled militarily. So the question really I think we need to be asking is, what is the future of atrocity prevention or atrocity mitigation in Darfur? That needs to be central to all of our considerations around how we engage with Darfur. I don't think we should get stuck into the sort of the battlefield lines and who's winning what, where, and when. I don't think that's very helpful. Because what we have in Al-Fasher and what we will see in other 4 states of Darfur is this confluence of genocide and famine. And we know from the UN, from a report that they have not published, that 90% of those who are experiencing famine are going to be experiencing famine will be in RSF-held areas. In particular, Niala, Jenaina, and Al-Fasher will be acutely hit by famine. So when we think about what is happening in Darfur, I don't think we should move beyond just sort of the broader political considerations and really think about what is the lived reality of people in Darfur right now and how do we engage with that in a way that is effective and in a way that is useful. Let me leave it there.
Thank you very much, Khulud. So, may I turn to you and perhaps we've asked you if you could say something about the key findings of your report on breaches of the Genocide Convention in Darfur during the current year.
Yeah, thanks, Rosalind, and thank you, Chatham House, for putting on this event in short notice, given the urgency of the attack now underway on Al-Fasher. And putting a spotlight on the atrocities is an important first step that is actually moving the dial and is certainly important. As Rosalind mentioned, so I'm an international human rights lawyer, and as Khulud mentioned, the wheels of justice turn at a glacial pace. And so observing this, we've developed a model where we gather our colleagues around the world who are jurists and qualified to review evidence of potential breaches of the Genocide Convention in real time based on open source information. And that way we can come to a conclusion in a timely manner instead of, I imagine all of us are frustrated with how historically genocide determinations have come far too late and after the fact and after destruction is complete. And so we're moved by that, and we've developed a model for a number of situations, and I co-chaired the inquiry into breaches of the Genocide Convention in Darfur with my colleague Mutassim Ali. Sadly, cannot be here, but he's on Zoom and can hopefully join and intervene in the Q&A. We conducted our inquiry with leading authorities on international law and regional experts, including founding prosecutors of the International Criminal Tribunals, presidents of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, and former Supreme Court justices, the head of UN Legal Affairs, to give our report and our findings the status of international law. Because the way international law works is when you have the top publicists and jurists come to a conclusion together, that will serve as a source of international law and an independent finding, which can then move states to take countermeasures against those who are violating the Genocide Convention, including those who are complicit in the genocide, outside actors, in addition to the RSF, which we found to be committing genocide. And we particularly focused on West Darfur in our findings, in our investigation. But we see the same dynamics playing out throughout the RSF's attacks. And you'll recall that the International Criminal Court issued the first genocide arrest warrant against al-Bashir, finding that the Janjaweed, along with the government, were carrying out very similar patterns of attacks manifesting a genocidal intent at the time through large-scale attacks, systematic attacks, which are mirrored today in the exact same strategies and methods. And so seeing the ethnically motivated killings in Ardamata and El Geneina last year, we undertook first an open letter gathering over 100 experts to alert the community to the serious risk of genocide, which itself imposes a duty on all states to act outside their borders, to do everything reasonably within their means to prevent genocide. And so that's number one. That's the first implication of the finding of a serious risk of genocide. The second implication of a finding of genocide is that states now have a basis to take legitimate countermeasures under international law that can take the form of any sort of economic, financial, political, diplomatic measures in response, including the responsibility to protect that can take any one of those avenues. And so what is so deeply inhumane about what is happening is that this is not only a repeat genocide in our lifetimes, but within a single generation in the 21st century. And the world is simply letting it happen. And there is no reason that the Sudan conflict is not in the news every single day and has a dedicated ticker, the same with Gaza and Ukraine. There is absolutely no reason that the biggest, in terms of sheer numbers, humanitarian crisis right now is not being monitored in this way. And I apologize if I give some graphic descriptions, but or recite any graphic statements, but some of the findings of genocidal intent derive from the statements by militiamen on the ground. So if you are Masalit, we decided we don't want any alive, not even the children. Some of the most open and explicitly genocidal statements that Human Rights Watch has documented and others. Boys that will grow up to kill us, so we must destroy them now. If the boy grows up, he will fight us, following the brutal murders of even 2-year-olds and 6-month-old children. And genocidal intent is not only found from statements, but also through the systematic genocidal acts, and every single one is occurring on a systematic basis. In West Darfur against the Masalit, and now we're seeing more against the Fur and Zagawa increasingly as villages are being burned on the way to El Fasher, but killing members of the group, causing serious bodily and mental harm, inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its destruction, and imposing birth prevention measures. So each one of these acts happening on a systematic basis against members of a specific group where militiamen actually screen for the identity of their victims, and each victim, the only common denominator is that they're members of the specific non-Arab groups. And so that's why it is so critical that what happens in El Geneina, Ardamata, and to a certain extent now, dynamics are different, but what happens in El Fasher must be accurately described as such, as genocide, when these patterns are so open and when we have a legal finding. And we shouldn't let this genocide get buried under a broader conflict between two warring sides, when what is happening in these specific events are massacres, ethnically targeted, mass sexual violence and rape against specific communities for their identity only. And so the UK and its allies should muster the strength to actually call out this for what it is. The perpetrators and enablers by name, including the UAE, and take any sort of accountability measures against the perpetrators and enablers to impose immediate costs now to deter the imminent atrocity crimes to come, and join us, as I'm announcing right now, in our case that we intend to bring to the International Court of Justice against the UAE for breaches of the Genocide Convention.
Well, thank you, Jenna, for that very sobering presentation. Abdullah, I wonder if I could turn to you now to talk about the impact of the war on civilians in Darfur, including on intercommunal relations and, of course, on the situation in Fasher.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair, and I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Chatham House for this, to organize this important event. I think paramount important to discuss a forgotten issue of the Darfur. And thank you, Mr. Diamond, and thank you, Khulud, to highlight in very important issue as well. And I'm going to just highlight impact of the war to the civilian of the Darfur. The tool of the war on the civilian in the Darfur cannot be overstated. Past and in the past and in the present. In the past, the conflict started in 2003 when al-Bashir regime was there, and they mobilized Janjaweed, which brand themselves now as the Rapid Support Forces, against the African tribe, and they committed genocide at that time. Resulted more than 300,000 innocent civilians was killed, and million was displaced to Chad in the refugee camps right now. All kinds of the crime have been committed, from war crime to the crime against humanity, looting, raping, sexual offense, kidnapping at that time. What is the new now? What is the change now? We believe that those historical grievances in intercommunal conflicts has increased the tension after Jenin genocide, and between the Arab and the non-Arab group in all part of the Darfur. Especially when the Rapid Support Forces or the Janjaweed brand themselves and the Rapid Support Forces and to become a decision maker in the Sudan and in the government, that tension was increased. After 15th of April 2005, 2023, that intercommunal tension was increased due to targeting civilian of the African tribe. And according to Human Rights Watch report, there's report recently come out saying the title of the report, Masalit Will Not Go Home, Ethnic Cleansing and the Crime Against Humanity in Jenin in the West Darfur, Sudan. The report indicates clearly internal displacement camp in the West Darfur were burned, and the systematic killing of the African tribe were committed from the Rapid Support Forces and its allies. And in regard to this, spokesman for the UN High Commission for the Human Rights, I copy his word. He said, "We are extremely alarmed by the report that the Rapid Support Forces and its ally, Arab militia, killed hundreds of the ethnic Masalit civilians." And also Andrew Marshall, UK Minister of the Africa, who recently visited Darfur camp in the Eastern Chad, said, I'm copying his word, this has all the hallmark of the ethnic cleansing. Tension among intercommunal group in different states in the Darfur region ran very high after the mass violence and the ethnic cleansing against the African tribe in the West Darfur. In the West, therefore, Darfur Diaspora Association, which I lead, DDA, is very worrying about the same situation could be happening in Fasher if the Rapid Support Forces control the city. Actually, Fasher is the home of the million 1 million people, half of them displaced from other parts of the Darfur due to the war. And the RSF mobilized its force around the city and besieged the city for a couple of months before launching a heavy attack on the last Friday. There was a heavy attack from the rapid support forces to the city. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Today is there is no clashes today. But despite the rapid support forces attack the city, despite the U.S. especially envoy call for the RSF to end the siege and the urging the SAF and its ally fighters to respect international humanitarian law and to protect the civilian. The attack on the city resulted dozen civilian casualties, including deaths and injuries. The situation got worse, with a report indicating that the harm to the civilian due to cross-fighting between the war parties. Civilians are suffering severe from the short of the supply, including medical supply and the food. In addition to the sense of insecurity, psychological and the emotional effect, including the children, suffering a lot today, even today. I was speaking to the deputy doctor of the doctor of the South Hospital in Fasher just today. They confirmed that 63 civilians was lost their life due to the cross-cutting fire, and 250 injured just in one hospital. This is the South Hospital in Fasher. RSF was determined to control the city on Friday, which was the heaviest attack there, but failed to do so. Our monitor on the ground conduct a brief survey. Our people put the question in Arabic and in the local dialogue that what is going to be the risk if the RSF control the city. 100%, shockingly, 100% said they are going to happen the same scenario that happened in the Jenena. So in Al-Fashir is 90% of the non-Arab and the African tribes there, and the Janjaweed, they are trying to commit the same atrocity that happened in Jenena. This is not my word, the word of the people on the ground according to the survey. This also showed the profound anxiety and the fear among the local population regarding the potential consequences of the RSF if they control the city. Now, what should be done by the international community and by us as the diaspora? International community should move from the word to the action to protect the civilian, including the measure of peacekeeping or any measures that are available. Immediately access of the humanitarian aid is essential to relieve the civilians that are on the crisis. The UN should deploy a measure to protect the civilian. This is, as they mentioned. International community should warn the country like UAE to stop supply the weapon because there is the embargo, the weapon supply in the Darfur apply from the UN according to the UN resolution. Actually, global inaction to confront the atrocity of this scale is unacceptable, and also the doing nothing is not an option at all from the international community. All the government across the globe should ensure that the protection of the civilian and impunity should be applied there instead of the encouraging RSF to hold the meeting with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Abdullah, for that. So now, finally, we have Toby Harwood. Toby, you've been waiting patiently online. I think I can see you there. Would you like to would you like to tell us about the worsening humanitarian situation in Darfur and the access challenges? I know you've recently been in Fasher. We'd be very interested indeed to hear your assessment of the situation.
Thank you very much, Roz. Can I just have a mic check? Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great, good. Okay, there's a heavy storm outside. I'm coming to you from Kenya. I'm in Nairobi in Kenya. Thanks a lot to Chatham House for this opportunity. You've asked me to speak about the worsening humanitarian situation in Darfur and access challenges. So this is due to two factors. Firstly, insecurity due to the conflict and the violence that many of the other speakers have spoken about. And then the second point, due to food insecurity, growing and burgeoning food insecurity. In terms of the violence, obviously we saw in Darfur, we've seen kind of three phases of the fighting, which have contributed massively to the worsening of the humanitarian situation. Firstly, we had the initial phase of the fighting from April to June, when many of the cities, including Fasher, came under heavy attack as the two warring parties fought each other. At that stage, the RSF took over significant amounts of Niala, Zalenji, and obviously later El Janina, through Arab militias, at least the latter. And we saw a significant looting and destruction of basic services and UN facilities across the region that was taken by the Rapid Support Forces and the allied militias. Then we had a sort of a lull, and then back in October, November, the RSF were able to take in swift succession the key SAF garrisons, starting in Niala, then in Zalenji, in Ardamatar, outside of El Janina, and Ed Dain. And it was thought then that the RSF would move on to Fasher and put significant pressure on Fasher. At that time, there was a local truce, a local agreement, which was partly negotiated through the auspices of local native administration, Idarat Ahliya, the Wali at the time, and local commanders, along with the RSF, that negotiated a sort of 5-point agreement which prevented a full-fledged RSF attack and was able to keep relative peace, relative stability, and I stress relative, for the next months through till April. And then you've seen this big escalation of violence in the last few weeks, April and now early May, where you're seeing the RSF increasingly, as other speakers have said, actively besieging Fasher, according to the Yale Center for the Yale Center with the NASA infrared satellite pictures, actively showing convoys of RSF and allied militia fighters heading towards Fasher, causing instability in other areas to the south and to the east. Why have you seen this escalation in tensions now? Firstly, the joint forces have revoked their neutrality. They played a critical role in keeping tensions down over the intervening period. Seen as a genuine neutral forces, they took a part in bringing in humanitarian assistance. I stress not UN humanitarian assistance, but other humanitarian assistance, and were kind of seen as a neutral, impartial actor. Then this broke down successively following press statements given in Port Sudan by the 2 or 3 political leaders there. Whereas military leaders on the ground kept to a neutral status. But unfortunately, during the Eid al-Fitr holiday, due to a number of factors, I think, RSF losses in Omdurman and parts of the east, military setbacks from the RSF, increasing tensions within, increasing concerns of the RSF, the needing for a military victory, as well as the joint forces. I think probably pressure on the joint forces to renounce their neutrality led to a revocation of their neutrality. At the same time, this was partly as a result of the RSF increasing their siege on El Fasher, particularly taking control of the routes to the north, particularly Melit. This is a major trade route that goes up to Libya, and it's also a humanitarian aid route up to Adibba and across to Port Sudan, and a route across to Tina. So that led very much to increased tensions. I have to say, I'm afraid that the control of aid routes and humanitarian assistance actually contributed to the escalation in the situation over the last week, after the government of Sudan revoked a note verbal which allowed UN and other humanitarian actors cross-border operations from Chad into Darfur, and attempted to control all aid movements into RSF territory. This was when the RSF responded by taking control of the aid routes and eventually the town of Melit, just to the north of El Fasher. And then the second point, food insecurity. I mean, others have spoken about it. I mean, what we've seen because of the fighting, we've seen, first of all, the ruination of the planting and the agricultural season last year, led to significantly reduced amounts of crops. Winter season also has been significantly adversely affected by the conflict. And then you've seen a lack of humanitarian aid getting in to Darfur, both cross-line from Port Sudan, and secondly cross-border from Chad. And this has obviously significantly decreased the amounts of food, both locally grown and brought in by agencies and INGOs. So, I mean, again, moving to the second part on access challenges, because this is very much linked. When the government of Sudan revoked permission for the UN to bring in, and for humanitarian actors to bring in aid from Chad, that completely stopped certainly the UN's ability to bring in aid. The government then partially reversed itself and gave us access through Tina into Darfur, and confirmed a northern route from Port Sudan, very important, from Port Sudan across Atbara, Adibba, through Melit into El Fasher. But unfortunately, despite that, it's been very difficult to get trucks into Darfur using these two routes provided by the government. They also provided us with another access route through Adre, but they limited that to 60 trucks. So while we were fairly easily able to put the 60 trucks along the Adre corridor into RSF controlled areas of Darfur, because of the availability of trucks, because of the availability of contracts with trucking companies, because of the availability of tarmac roads linking El Janena with Zelenji and Natiti with Niala, we're able to get aid quite quickly through there. But the routes that the government gave us are much, much harder, more remote, longer, don't have tarmac roads, take a longer turnover time, and indeed, because of the insecurity around El Fasher, have rendered those very difficult. And with the oncoming rainy season will also mean that they will be, our ability to put aid through those government-approved routes will be further hindered. Unfortunately, I have to say, also our ability to get trucks through or from the Port Sudan route has also been hindered by both insecurity and continuing bureaucratic impediments put in place by aspects or elements of the government of Sudan. So this all comes in the context of very, very concerning reports. I think we've all seen the IPC report from December. This is the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Report, which puts 5.3 million people in Darfur in both IPC3, that's crisis food insecurity, and emergency food insecurity, 5.3 million people in 15 localities of Darfur in this status. I'm not sure what report Khulud was referring to when she spoke earlier, but it is expected that the IPC will release a second report a bit later this month, which will update exactly those figures and in which food classification areas people will fall. And we expect, unfortunately, because of the deteriorating situation that more people will be facing both emergency levels of food insecurity and catastrophic levels of food insecurity, which then once a panel has met will determine whether we have reached the stage of famine or not. But certainly all signs are pointing in very negative directions. So I will stop there. I think I've covered broadly the points. I hope I've kept to 8 minutes and hand you back the floor, Ros.
Thank you very much indeed, Toby, and to all speakers for keeping to time. I will now open the floor to questions. I can see we've already got some very good questions coming in from those online, but I perhaps will take first of all a round of questions from those who are present in the hall. If you want to ask a question, could you perhaps please state your name and affiliation and try to keep your intervention as concise as possible so as to give as many other people as possible the chance to contribute. I'll probably try to take, if there are sufficient questions, I'll take questions in, say, groups of 3. And we'll then take some questions online. So, right, a question over there.
Yeah, thank you very much for the panel and thank you for Chatham House. Actually, I think this issue of genocide, I think is a major problem in Sudan, and I think it's like cultural or mindset or genocidal by force of habit, as Alex Diwal described it in 2004. And it's since 1955 war, killing people according to their ethnicity and tribe is being on. You know, there is a case in South Sudan in the war which started in 1905. A commander asked a soldier to open a tummy of a pregnant woman and asked her to take out the rebel, because he actually indicted him of being a rebel before even he been born. And that has been going on for long. And it is culture. These people we left with them, the militias, and the army, the deal with the army is do what you want. At least this is our counterinsurgency policy. I think we need to address this. And I think the issue, if you look at Burhan and others now, what they talk about war, they never show remorse. They never even feel sorry for Sudanese people. They're only asking people to go and kill and fight. I think this have to be addressed. I don't know how, but this is the issue have to be addressed. It will not going to be eliminated easily.
Thank you, Hafiz. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Alan Nicol. I'm really curious to know if we're on the precipice of an enormously serious genocide event. If El Fasher falls, where is the African Union in all of this, and why is it so quiet?
Thank you very much. I think we had, yes, please.
Thank you. According of speaker, especially of human rights, and indicated clearly what's going on in Al Fasher is going to be genocide. And then I think people is not died of, of only of genocide, but of bullet of UAE. And then, so what is the action or international action, especially UK and USA, to take and prevent not happen again genocide in Al Fasher? This is, if you see the sign, same things happen in Genena will be happening in Al Fasher. So what's a step of action has been taken to prevent that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I could take, there was one, I think, gentleman over there, was it? No? Has anyone else got their hand up? No. Yes, there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Samuel Allen, King's College London. I was just going to ask, you mentioned UAE and arms being traded. I was going to ask, what about other countries around the world? How are other countries involved in this conflict? Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for those questions. So we had a question about, we had a comment on the approach to genocide that had been going on since 1955. We had a question about why what is the AU doing about this, why it's been so quiet, what action could the UK and the US take, and a question about what other sort of countries are involved in arms supplies. I don't necessarily expect all the panel to comment on this, but would anybody like to lead off? Khaloud, would you like to tackle any of those points?
Sure. Hafiz, totally agree with you. This is a tale as old as time is in Sudan, and I think it will be the work of all of our lifetimes to figure out how to mitigate this tendency within the Sudanese state. I think one thing about this war that we haven't seen in other conflicts is that it is the capital that was hit first and hit hardest, and that has led to more people across the different social and political divides experiencing what state violence looks like. Previously, all the wars were compartmentalized specifically to keep people in the center very much inoculated against state violence. And since we saw sort of iterative moves by the state to control, for example, protesters, the floodgates have opened when we started seeing massacres in the center, but now we see all-out war. My hope is that there's at least in some way a silver lining, that this shared experience now of what it means to be dispossessed, displaced, and to undergo this level of, or experience this level of violence will at least create some desire to not see it happen again. And now obviously that's a vain hope because we know how these things work, but I think at least there's something to build on there. But you're right, it's a big question. The question on the AU, I mean, perennial question, several reasons. One, the AU has elections, so it's not really focused on these issues. It has appointed an AU panel led by the Ghanaian diplomat Mohamed Ibn Chambas, but they don't really know how to engage on this. The leadership we saw 20-something years ago from IGAD and the AU is completely absent right now. They've become more of a stumbling block to progress rather than a means to facilitate it or creation of pathways. And I, for one, don't have any hope that they will be in a position to do anything. I think they should be partnered with, mostly so they don't stand in the way, but I don't think the answers lie there. And I think any talk of African solutions for African problems completely neglects us. This is not an African problem. As we saw, there are so many countries in the region and further afield that have a stake in this, so this is by no means a local African problem. I think when it comes to the prevention of genocide, first and foremost, we need a protection of civilians mission. And we've all heard so much about how it's expensive, it's difficult to get to the Insecurity Council and everything else. These are just excuses. Of course, it's hard. Nothing worth doing is easy. But it's absolutely essential to get at least some semblance of a menu of different protection items, but not to leave a protection of civilians mission off the table. But in the meantime, because those things take a while to do, and to fund pressure on the different sides, and I'm not here just talking about Hemeti, I'm talking about different commanders at different levels in Darfur. The UK government came under a lot of flack for a Guardian piece that said they were speaking to the RSF, and they very quickly backtracked on that. I don't think that's the right way to play it. Of course, they have to engage with the RSF. How else are they going to pass on messages? How else are they going to say that there will be consequences to these atrocities in Darfur? They need to do this intentionally, and they need to do it within a strategy, and they need to do it in a way that doesn't legitimize the RSF, but allows them to pass on messages. To spotlight this, because the silence is what's killing, countries in further afield, those that are supporting the conflict in one way or another, places like Cairo, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi are noting the silence in the West and noting the fact that Sudan is not in the media. And this allows them to help fuel this conflict in different and myriad ways. And that is a silence that's killing a lot of people right now. And then most importantly, consequences. There need to be consequences to the actions that are happening. When people die, when aid is blocked, when unnecessary bureaucratic and other types of blockages are put in place, there need to be consequences to that. Otherwise, what are we doing here? And just lastly, yes, there are other countries other than the UAE. I think I'll let others speak to that. But just to reiterate that this is not a Sudanese issue. It no longer is a Sudanese issue. It is much broader than that. And therefore, it will require a global movement to really help try to end it.
Thank you very much indeed. Abdullah, do you want to comment perhaps on the question about other countries that are involved?
Yes, I just want to highlight that I disagree with Sister Khulud regarding the RSF meeting with the UK official. We at the Darfur Diaspora Association contact the Foreign Office, and they reply to us regarding the meeting. They said yes, they hold the meeting, but not a secret. We believe that Rapid Support Forces and the Janjaweed committed genocide several times, not just one time, several times to our people, and the element of genocide is clear by Mr. Diamond. Actually, we don't want to just discover everything here. We will talk to the Foreign Office in the official meeting, and we will say our opinion there clearly, because we as the Darfurian and the British, we oath to protect and to keep the value of the British. And the value of the British is not to protect and not to meet the genocide people, the people who committed genocide. Regarding to that oath, we will talk to them actually seriously in this matter, and we are, as the Darfurian Association, all our people in the diaspora, very upset, actually very upset. They keep calling every day to protest, but we want to approach diplomatic way with the Foreign Office. This is one thing. Regarding the AU has not got any tools to make his own decision. I'm not going to talk about politics here. I'm the human rights defense, but African problem should be solved by the African people. This should be clear, this one. Regarding the question about the UA and the dual supply, we put on the recommendation, that one, and it is clear, international community to warn and the section EU to stop supply the weapon to the RSF through Uganda and the Chad to kill our people in Darfur, to commit genocide there. Have to be clear this. And every country that in the middle to protect that in the Security Council should be stopped that. And this is also one of the value, our value as the British, we oath to this, have to not stop barrier to sanction a country that submit the weapon to kill our people. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to, I think a lot's been covered. I want to just comment on the recurring genocide since the 50s, as was commented. This is why we've been calling this an abandoned genocide, which is not only shameful, but there is actually a heightened legal duty to prevent genocide, particularly for the UK, who has an imprint actually in Sudan in the past, and a special duty, a heightened duty now, to end this cycle of genocide. As for preventing genocide, I think there are two key dimensions. One is protection, as Khulud mentioned, fundamentally providing protection mechanisms for the communities immediately at risk. And then the second dimension is accountability through imposing immediate costs and targeting the capacity of the perpetrators to commit these atrocity crimes. And so that can play out in any number of ways, including in imposing targeted sanctions against the entities that are fueling the RSF and the SAF to a lesser extent, and naming it, calling it what it is, using this language of genocide and implementing that atrocity prevention lens, and working behind the scenes, but also publicly to put pressure on the UAE in particular. And as to other countries that are involved, our report also finds the CAR, Chad, Libya, and Russia via the Wagner Group for providing, geographic, military, and economic assistance, although the real influence lies with the UAE, and so that is where the focus should be.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to take a few of the questions now online. Anthony Neal, I can see that you've asked. You've got a very good question. Would you like to ask your question live? Ahmed, can we unmute?
Hi, yes, hopefully you can hear me. So this is Anthony Neal from the Sudan INGO Forum. I'm just noting Khalud's point in terms of the famine and the likely impact of that, particularly in areas controlled by RSF, and what we've seen from the kind of SAF-controlled authorities in Port Sudan of an active denial of access to RSF-controlled areas. I was wondering if the current position of the UN, which is to largely state that they need the consent of the authorities in Port Sudan to be able to move aid into areas of Darfur, legitimizes an authority that has generally not facilitated aid access to its civilian population, whether that undermines the neutrality of the response, and given the criticality of the situation, whether we need a different legal interpretation to be able to facilitate access into Darfur. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I see Nicholas Coughlin, you've got a question as well. Would you like to ask your question live? I don't think we can. Let me read out.
I wonder if you can hear me now. No. Okay.
Yes, you've come through. Good, Nicholas, go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm calling from a long way away in Western Canada. It seems on the evidence presented by the Wallenberg Centre and others would seem to be a no-brainer that Hemeti should be personally sanctioned. But I'm wondering, to what extent this risks torpedoing any mediation process. And a related question, also a legal question, are there grounds for deeming the RSF a terrorist organization, or does this bear the same risks of torpedoing any mediation?
Thank you very much, Nicholas. And I'll turn now to Esther Sprague. Would you like to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to ask Mr. Diamond to repeat his announcement. I think he said that the UAE is being taken to the International Court of Justice for its participation in genocide in Sudan, but I just want to confirm that's what I heard.
Thank you very much, Esther. With these three questions, Toby, perhaps I could ask you to perhaps deal with the question from Anthony Neal.
Yeah, I was afraid you would. That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, no, Anthony's right. I mean, he knows very well. I mean, there is a legal, different legal definitions for international law and the status of sovereignty, state sovereignty, versus aspects of international humanitarian law, which clearly set out rules and obligations of member states in order to abide by international humanitarian law, and particularly in this case, starvation as a weapon of war. Indeed, I mean, the legal interpretation that is put out for the UN as an intergovernmental organization is that we do indeed need the consent to cross borders and to undertake operations of the recognized government of Sudan, and the United Nations as a body recognizes the government of Sudan as the authorities in Port Sudan as the government of Sudan. So we do need their consent. But there is always, as I said, different points of view put across as to when there should be a more flexible or a more creative approach in looking at cross borders. But this is an ongoing discussion. And we hope very much that we will have the consent of the government of Sudan to enable us to respond in a timely manner and get to all areas of where there are vulnerable populations, people on the brink of famine. We need to get there. We need to improve our advocacy to ensure that we have the consent of the government to get there. I'll stop there. Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Toby. Halu, did you want to follow up on that particular point?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, one thing is I disagree strenuously with Toby. Several things. One, the UN seems to have forgotten that we've had a coup in Sudan of 2021, and therefore we don't have a government that has any legitimacy or a constitutional basis, and therefore there is no government in Sudan. You may have some de facto authorities that you work with, fine, but I think allowing one of the belligerent sides to take on this mantle of government gives it undue powers to do, frankly, what it's been doing quite well for decades. Anyone who has any, memory of the North-South War will remember how the Bashir regime perfected using the levers of the bureaucratic state to effectively starve people. And we're very much seeing this right now. And I think Toby can attest to this very much because he lives it on a daily basis. That's one. Two, in a case like this, you would think that even if SAF were to have sovereignty in Sudan, that the humanitarian imperative would trump that. And I think it's actually criminal that the United Nations is allowing SAF to play fast and loose with people's lives like this. And rather than giving notice to SAF, for example, that it's doing cross-border aid from Chad to Darfur, it is instead seeking permission, which means the UN is in fact getting entangled in all the bureaucratic nightmares that we are very much aware of and are very predictable. So to my mind, the UN now becomes very much complicit in the famine that is happening in Sudan right now. And part of the reason that it is delaying calling this a famine is the duty to act. And therefore, there is a very uncomfortable truth here, which is that people are being let down by the de facto authorities as well as the United Nations and the humanitarian response. So Anthony is absolutely right in asking that question. Another thing to say is that you do not need, under international humanitarian law, a UN Security Council resolution to do cross-border aid, nor do you need a national ceasefire to do cross-line aid, that is between SAF-held territories to RSF territories or vice versa. And so the fact that we are dilly-dallying around these sort of interpretations of what constitutes a famine, do we have enough data when we know the famine is already upon us? MSF is talking about children dying every hour. When we know that the UN has recognized already, WFP has recognized already quietly that there are at least 5 areas in Sudan that have famine and many more will follow. When we know that we have already passed the threshold for genocide, as Jonas' study shows, and yet we're talking about, do we have enough sort of ideas of what intent constitutes intent in this case? These procedural, definitional issues will actually cost people lives. So I think we need to move well beyond that. We are in famine. We have been seeing genocide. We do not need to seek the permission of SAF. We need to inform them at best. And we do need the international community to, frankly, grow a pair and move on this very, very quickly, because not doing so is going to cost millions of people their lives.
Thank you, Halud, for that very strong statement. On the question from Nicholas Coughlin about whether Hemeti should be personally sanctioned, or would such a step torpedo prospects for any successful mediation process and thus be counterproductive? And should Western governments deem the Rapid Support Force as a terrorist organisation, or does that carry the same risk? I was going to ask perhaps if Mutassim Ali, if he's online, might like to comment, but before that, Abdullah, do you want to say anything on that particular question?
Yeah, actually, regarding the terrorist organization, RSF, there is clear evidence that from the report of the Human Rights Watch and from the UN High Commissioner, Amnesty International, all the organization, humanitarian organization, that they agree with RSF committed genocide, committing ethnic cleansing, committing war crime against humanity, committed all kind of the crime, looting, kidnapping, sexual assaulting, and everything. This should be a terrorist organization, and we also raised in our letter in the October 2023, when we did a protest in front of the 10 Downing Street. In our letter, clearly mentioned that the UK government should should designate RSF as the terrorist organization. But unfortunately, they conduct a meeting with them. Anyway, this is, should be something else. Evidence that the Hemeti should be personally sanctioned, this is, I think, I'll leave it to the lawyer to answer that question. Yeah.
Mutassim Ali, I don't know if you would like to comment. I think the crux of the question is the timing. Given the possibility of the Jeddah Forum meeting again and the efforts to get a ceasefire, would it be counterproductive to sanction Hemeti in advance of that, and similarly designation of the RSF as a terrorist organization? It's a question of sort of sequencing and timing as much as the substance, so to speak. Would you like to comment?
Sure thing. Thanks a lot for the panelists and, of course, the chair for really moderating this esteemed panel. Right to the question of whether sanctioning Hemeti and the RSF would be really helpful. And I do think that the answer is yes. I think one of the reasons, I think Khulud already indicated this, one of the reasons why we continue to see these atrocities is because of the prevalence of, impunity, right? And so we've been trading, justice for political considerations since the transitional government in 2019 to date. And it appeared that these political considerations, right, really, do not work. And so I am really against the fact that governments such as the US, UK, EU, who have tools to go after individuals and entities, right, take these political considerations, especially when we speak of atrocity crimes, right, speaking of genocide. And therefore, I think we definitely should sanction Hemeti and other senior leaders. I genuinely do not believe in the Jeddah peace process. We've seen this, right, for the past year. It didn't work. Instead, we continue to see people being killed on a daily basis. And therefore, I think sanctions should be one of the most effective tools, and it must be replicated by many states for them to be effective. Then to the question of the RSF, I mean, one of the problems with the international law is that there are really not a lot of, especially with the Geneva Convention, right? The Genocide Convention. There is really no a mechanism to prosecute entities such as the RSF. And so how can we really hold organizations like the RSF accountable? And I think designating such an organization as a terrorist organization will be critical. One of the reasons why the RSF continues to commit atrocities is because of the ability to continue the fight, the ability to purchase weapons. And one of the ways to cut off the RSF from the funding sources to designate it as a terrorist organization. And if I may, I would like to make really, few observations. First, the UN medical researchers estimated death toll of the death toll at least 300,000 from the conflict in Darfur between 2003 and 2008. This number continues to be the same until today. And it simply cannot be true, right? We're speaking of 2024. And so there is really no subsequent mortality assessment since then. And therefore, I think this has to be updated immediately. And I'll explain in a bit why. Second, we continue to hear from UN officials, right, until today, that since the April 15, 2023, that 15,000 people have been killed in Sudan. And I question this number as well, because the same UN pattern of experts in Sudan said between 10,000 to 15,000 people have been killed in Al Janin and West Darfur alone. And so it is, again, it is, inaccurate to say that the people killed in the context of the current war in Sudan are 15,000. These numbers are critical because one of the reasons why we think, stating the at least sort of relative right numbers is to say that, for example, in Nigeria now we see substantial parts of the Masalit have been annihilated. We are not sure how many Masalit members remain in Al Janeina, and therefore I think knowing these numbers will be critical. And finally, what we are seeing in Al-Fasher today is a textbook of what we saw in Al Janeina, right? Basically, the RSF besieging the city, right, imposing conditions meant to destroy the civilian populations, right? And so this is exactly what is happening in Al-Fasher now. It is really a matter of when the civilians of Fasher will face the same fate in Al Janeina. One of the reasons why there are, we name atrocity crimes as international crimes because these crimes shock our conscience as human beings, right? And therefore, it requires immediate action from the international community. Right. Otherwise, it would be pointless for us to determine that there is a genocide, there is war crimes and crimes against humanity without immediate action and consequences. And therefore, I think the fact that people agree that there are war crimes, crimes against humanity, it should immediately generate international action. And we failed to do this in the context of Sudan and Darfur in particular. And I think this is shameful, disgraceful. And one final comment. People speak of risk of atrocities in Al-Fasher. We are beyond the risk right now, right? We have already seen, as Yale Humanitarian Lab already indicated, dozens of villages have been burned down completely. This is not risk. We are actually beyond that risk. And I think people need to call what is happening in Darfur for what they are. This is not ethnic cleansing. This is actually genocide. Ethnic cleansing does not have a meaning in international law. Basically, it's meaningless, right? And therefore, I think we need to call these atrocities for what they are and urge the international community to act immediately to prevent further atrocities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mutassim. I wonder if you could perhaps respond to Esther's question, who asked for more details about your mention of a possible case before the International Criminal Court against the UAE.
Just to clarify, I was inviting the public to join us and support us and I expressed our intention to bring this case in the future, near future.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, in the back row.
Thank you very much to all the panelists, and special thanks to the chair. My name is Sabo Aziz. I was speaking to renowned historian and media insider Zainab al-Badawi on Tuesday at the Blood Snake School of Government, and she reminded me that this week marks 15 years since her interview with President al-Bashir, who was the first serving head of state to be indicted for alleged war crimes over the Darfur conflict. I asked her two questions, which I would also like to put to all the panelists, but especially to Mr. Diamond. The majority of Sudanese people want to see peace in Sudan. How do you feel personally about reunification with South Sudan? My second question, what we see and hear from Western media about the prospects for peace in Sudan is that they don't believe reunification is an attractive proposition for the southern people especially. Do you think the media bears responsibility for the war in Sudan? Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the questioner here, and then I'll take one question from those online.
Thank you. I just want to talk about the... hello, Mawan Mota from South Sudan originally. I wanted to comment on, I think what makes this meeting very important is the fear of the imminent massacre in Fasher, right? So the most important question would be, how could we prevent that? And I think, like indicting an individual like Hemeti, I think that's just a cop-out. It's just going to complicate the situations. Genocide is the history of Sudan. 2.5 million South Sudanese died over the successive wars since independence. What is that if it is not genocide? Who's responsible? So indicting Hemeti now is not a question. I think the problem is deterrence. How do you stop people from doing it? It's too late to put any force on the ground to stop this happening. But people could be named, individuals could be named internationally. Hemeti and Burhan, personally, to be personally held accountable. Eventually, because I'm sure they are fighting now, not in order to die, each of them believes that they're going to be the leader of Sudan one day. It's a power struggle. So the message should go to them that however long this goes on, if atrocities against civilians on either side, by any of them, happens in this period, they will be held responsible. And therefore, international law should come in. So it should be a clear warning to any of them that, you are not going to survive. We are going to uphold you. That's my message. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwan. We have a question online from Jill Lusk. Jill, would you like to ask your question?
Right. I think Khulud has sort of already answered my question before I ask it, because I agree with what she said in her last intervention. But it seems to me that it's absolutely critical that, yes, the RSF is clearly responsible for genocide or ethnic cleansing in Darfur. There's no doubt about that. But the SAF, the Sudan Armed Forces, the people behind that are the Islamists of the previous regime. And this is exactly what they want to happen. They want the UAE to be blamed, and particularly they want Hemeti and what is seen as an ethnic gang to be blamed. There is the great danger that by condemning only one side, it legitimizes the other side. And this is actually what the Islamists who want to return to power are seeking. I mean, this is what's driving this, actually. So it seems crucial to me that as Marwan just said, you might have to look at both sides if you're talking about sanctions or any kind of action, any kind of decisive action.
Thank you. I think we perhaps have, if there's one more question, this will have to be the last one over here.
Yes, the moment it's a bit early to say, but the deterrent and the lack of accountability and so on. Okay, so my name is Aziz Noor, and what I wanted to say was the accountability and the impunity and the deterrence. Even if these people were named and brought to account almost, if we have something like what's happening now at the ICC, which is this squeaky clean way of doing it, where the defendant has to have all his rights and so on. At the moment, the court is held up with one trial from the 2020 to 2004 Misali Kosheb, where they can't produce witnesses, I believe, because of the government the so-called government in Sudan won't let them get these witnesses. So if we carry on in this way, 20 years, one person, even if anybody's called to account today, they won't worry. It's not going to happen.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we'll let the panelists have a final, perhaps make their final comments, and Toby will also come back to you for a final comment if you wish. Halu, can we start? Okay, Abdallah, let's start with you at your end.
Okay, I'm just going to ask to answer before the last question regarding the RSF and SAF. Both of them are responsible for the crime. To be honest, I'm here. I'm not a politician. I'm not going to talk about the politics. the genocide happened, you just ignore it, and the weapon cross the borders, although there is the impact of the on the weapon in Darfur, you just ignore it. I'm talking about something I think more important. All the NGO organizations condemn RSF to commit genocide against the Masalit in Guinea. This is clear, true. Now, and also, in 2003, from 2003 until the resolution of the Sudan in December 2019, al-Bashir, Abdurrahim Mohammed Hussein, and the Ali Harun and the Kosheb were responsible for the genocide that committed. And until now, they are free. Who is, in this war, who is committed the most atrocities and the killing and the rooted in Sudan? RSF is clear. It is clear. Yes, there is some atrocities committed by the SAF, by the bombing to the civilian. But who's got the intention to kill the African people? That's the question here. Who is intentionally killed the African people? Who is intentionally committed genocide to the people? All the NGO blame RSF to do so. But the politicians try to manipulate the thing out. That is true. That I'm going to talk about it. Killing the people and the bloodshed compromise with the gold is not an option to us, to the Darfur Diaspora Association. No compromise bloodshed to the gold or the bloodshed to the interest of the countries. RSF is responsible for all the crimes that happen, and we condemn any meeting that conduct with the RSF. We condemn. We are calling for RSF to be terrorist organization. This is my question, my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll just close. I want to say that stopping a genocide is a collective responsibility, and so the ICC, the International Criminal Court, I totally agree. They play a particular role, and 4 out of the 5 suspects in the Darfur situation are at large, and that's why we took an approach, a separate track of accountability. And as you noticed in my remarks, I've only focused on the separate track of accountability through state action, through countermeasures under public international law, a separate form of justice other than international criminal law, a complementary form of justice, and that's why we identify the RSF as an entity responsible, not individuals for genocide, and SAF as well, complicit in the genocide. So I will say that as closing.
Thank you very much. Toby, do you want to make any final comments?
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. I noticed a couple of humanitarian-focused questions in the chat, so let me respond a bit to Margie on her issue on local civil society actors. I mean, it's absolutely clear. Well, her question here is looking at how local civil society actors have been the main humanitarian responders over the last year, and how can we be more flexible and creative in supporting their local efforts. 100% fully agree with you. The absolute heroes of this very, very gruesome, bad year, extremely bad year for Sudan, Darfur and Sudan as a whole, have been the local actors, the emergency response rooms, other local civil society organizations that have been, running things, everything from soup kitchens and other basic humanitarian responses. They have done a heroic job, and they deserve much, much, much more support from the international community. I think the humanitarian system the wheels are moving, again, slowly, perhaps not as glacial as some of the other mechanisms we've spoken about this evening, but there is a definite shift towards getting more funding and more support to some of these local humanitarian responders. We've spoken, I know USAID is taking a lead in this, and Norwegian Refugee Council too, alongside the UN-supported Sudan Humanitarian Fund. And it's absolutely essential that more support be given to these local responders. I mean, the situation in Darfur or in Fasher we've spoken about now. I mean, the UN is in very close contact with these local responders on the ground. We wish we could support them more. I wish personally we could be physically there on the ground with them. But it is shifting, and certainly a huge kudos, a big shout out to those local organizations who have been the heroes of the humanitarian system over the last year. Other than that, I see former senior UN official Peter Schuman talking about what Khulud called the non-action of the UN bureaucracy and the SG in particular. Yeah, you might say that, and I might personally agree 100% with Khulud's remarks myself, but I don't want to be, like Peter Schuman, a former senior UN official, at least not now. So no, big thanks for this opportunity, and very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in this and fully support everything that has been said this evening. Thank you. Ross, back to you.
Thank you very much, Toby. Before turning to Khulud for the final word, I just wanted to perhaps pick up on the point that the international community has failed over many years to actually do anything to ensure that former President Bashir, Ahmed Haroun and Abdul Rahim Mohamed Hussein were arrested. And indeed, we know that these individuals are now being protected within the SAF-controlled area of Sudan. Also, just sort of picking up on Jill's point, I mean, it is important still to recall that while the RSF are responsible for what is happening at the moment on the ground, they were created by the Bashir regime and trained by the SAF to operate in exactly the way that they're doing at the moment. So I think, and of course, we're working hand in hand with the SAF until very recently. So I think one just needs to look at both sides of this. I also agree with the point that that we really do need a protection of civilians mission. So I think although despite what we know about the divisions in the Security Council and how difficult this would be, I think this is it's important to look at what options nevertheless might exist. And in terms of immediate deterrence, whether anything more can be done at a very high political level to put pressure on those regional actors who have influence on the RSF to exercise restraint. But Khulud, would you like to make any final comments?
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, the question on South Sudan, none of us are from South Sudan, so we can't really say whether they'd be interested in joining, but I don't think that what is happening in Sudan is particularly attractive to anyone right now. Marwan is saying no, so I think that's a pretty, I think that's probably pretty representative. I think the trouble isn't how do we bring South Sudan back. I think the trouble is how do we stop other regions from seceding. Exactly, and that's exactly, and that's the fight for today, right? How do we A, keep the Sudanese state from disintegrating altogether as a state, and B, how do we keep Sudan as a people, as a shab, together and not to fragment further? I think that's the topic for today and for the foreseeable future. When it comes to prevention of genocide, it's a key question because I think we can all see this happening in real time. We're literally seeing this build on a daily basis. And speaking to people who work on atrocities prevention, literally the row behind you, Mortat, speak to those people, by the way, they're brilliant and they are very much pushing, trying to push the UK government and other governments to act before it's too late. You know, one thing that it comes out very clearly is that sometimes when a genocide is happening, governments don't recognize that a genocide is happening. And they only figure this out when it's way too late. I think Kate from Protection Approaches just there mentioned the case of Srebrenica and how it took forever for people to recognize that a genocide had happened. I think we're at that moment now. And I would think that given how many genocides, frankly, that even we have lived through, we should be much better able, and states should be much better able to recognize when a genocide is happening and therefore actually act. Just, I think on the last, and just related to that, I should say, you know, people in positions of power, people in the halls of Whitehall, need to pick up the phone and they need to speak to world leaders and make sure that this is on the top 3 priorities in every phone call that is made. That is how you make sure that people in Abu Dhabi, people in Riyadh, and people in Cairo, as well as other places, recognize that you are serious. The silence in Whitehall, the silence in Brussels, and the silence in DC is creating a huge vacuum that is being filled by all sorts of nefarious actors, state actors and otherwise. So there is a responsibility there, and actually there's a very simple and immediate way to at least trying to get ahead of this. One last thing, and I don't want to pick on Toby too much, so forgive me, Toby. But it's all well and good when UN officials say, oh, isn't it how wonderful and heroic are the emergency response rooms are doing such a great job, when it took absolutely forever to recognize for them to recognize the role that emergency response rooms are playing. And, you know, for goodness sake, recognizing them for what they're doing is just the first step. They need to be funded, and urgently. If there is a bureaucratic impediment with the UN system, it is up to the UN to fix that. Secondly, partnership. This is not about making emergency response rooms NGOs that are effectively implementers on the ground. This is about making them partners, so they make decisions about how money is coming in, where it is being spent, what the priorities are. And this is exactly from what the ERRs are saying. And lastly, protection. Recognizing that these people are humanitarian actors means they need to be afforded the protection of humanitarian actors. They are not. We are hearing on a daily basis that they're being targeted, they're being disappeared, and they're being killed. For the UN to really and truly and sincerely recognize that these are the people at the front line, they owe them that much. They owe them partnership, they owe them protection, and they owe them much greater financing than is currently happening. I was just in Uganda and hearing this straight from the horse's mouth, straight from ERRs. So wonderful that everyone gets to feel all nice and warm and lovely about supporting local actors, but that support needs to be way better articulated and immediately improved and made much more concrete. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our excellent panel for their answering all these questions of their presentations, and also to thank all of you, both in the room and online, for your contributions. I think it's been a very timely discussion. Hopefully some of the things that have been said this afternoon will have some impact. Thank you very much.